Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. Today I will explain a set of tools and techniques we use to capture and implement the requirements for complex business processes in Odoo. So in this talk, there should be interesting stuff for business analysts and developers as well. And I start with an explanation of the actual business case that triggered the development of this concept. Right. Yeah, it's easier. So the context is a project we have made for the public administration of the Belgian Walloon region. So Wallonia is the south of Belgium. It's 3.6 million inhabitants. And the public administration for Wallonia is about 9,000 civil servants, organized in about 1,500 departments, small and big. So, yeah, it's a public administration, and the scope of the project was mainly purchasing and logistics. That means users can start purchase requests by browsing the catalog of available articles following the public contract they have in place. Purchase requests go through a validation process, are converted to purchase order. Before that, there is budget accounting taking place, because the public administration, to purchase something, you need to do a budget reservation, so you need to carve out a part of the budget before being allowed to purchase. So we need to track all that. Then we process vendor bills. We interface with the payment system to trigger the payment of the invoice, also with the link with the public accounting system, because yeah, you may know there are in general two budgets in public administrations, at least in Europe, one for commitments and one for payments. Then there is inventory management, an important side of asset lifecycle management, which is tracking where are the stuff they've bought. And the stuff they buy with that can be tables, chairs, laptops, IT stuff, software, but cars, tractors, chainsaws, whatever you can imagine a large administration like that can buy. Okay. And as the main challenge of such a project is that first it's large. You see 1,500 departments is quite big. Of course, lots of custom development, as much as we like using Odoo out of the box with as little customization as we can. In a large public administration, of course, you cannot change all their process to fit Odoo. So, and yeah, we cannot do things like cowboy, so we had to find ways to extend Odoo in a sane way. So talking about future migration stays some reasonable discussion. Also sophisticated process, and that will be the core of my talk, because they have multi-steps approval. You can imagine an invoice is not just draft and open. And in those steps, many conditions to go from one step to the other. Who can validate what at which stage, depending on who is owner of the good purchase, or who is the department that's triggering the purchase, and things like that, with complex data confidentiality rules, of course. So the core of my talk will be to show you a technique we have developed to analyze those business processes and implement them in a reliable way. So what do we call complex business process? Well, it's a bit everywhere. The typical free flow Kanban view does not fit the bill. Yeah, Kanban view is very nice, very flexible. You can move stage as you want. But when comes the time to control exactly who can go to which step, depending on their roles, and as many conditions to control which transition can take place in the process, of course it becomes much more difficult to implement with that approach. And then when you need to control the process in a strict way, which is actually mandatory in those kind of systems because they are replacing paper process with that. So they need traceability, they need trust that when the system is logging that someone has done something, it's been done according to their permissions in the organization. It's very important. And also we need to give some comfort to the user. So as much as possible, we must absolutely avoid that when the user clicks on the button, he gets a nasty error message saying it does not have permission to read or write something. And also we have to execute actions when transition happens. We need to send notifications, we need to send our data to external systems, and so on and so on. So to do that, of course, there are standard to-do mechanisms. So first and foremost, the record rules, very, very important. We use them quite a lot. Interesting challenge of performance tuning when you must do record rules based on a hierarchy of 1,500 departments. It's not always easy to write the domains in an efficient way, but it's doable. Need to hide or show the buttons in the view depending on all kinds of condition. But to do that, you have mechanism in Odoo. You can control the visibility with the domain in the view. So that's good, and it can be used. Also, very important, hiding the buttons. It's nice, but that's not enough. If you have hidden the button, and then some guy in the IT department has understood that it's Odoo reading the documentation and doing an XML RPC call, if that is allowed, well, it's not going to be acceptable. So we really need to secure the view, but also secure the code. And often when you go that far, you end up doing the same condition in the view and in the code. It's a bit messy. There are techniques to work around that, but then it's a lot of manual work to do it properly. Also, to react to state change, you can override methods in Odoo. You can implement automated actions. It's nice. It works. But in the end, when you do all that, the implementation of your process becomes spread across many places, in view, in code, in automated actions, in record rules, a bit of everything. And it's very difficult then to audit and to maintain the code when you need to change something. And also, very important point, how to add new states to Odoo flows. When you take an invoice, it goes to draft, to open, then paid. If you need more, for instance, between draft and open, which will be my example, how do you do that? Newcomers tend to say, okay, good, I will extend the selection of states on the invoice field, on the state field of the invoice. It's a very, very bad idea to do that, because Odoo internals have all kinds of conditions depending on those exact states. Or maybe they do, if this state is that, then do this, or if this is not that, then do this, but unless you read all the code of Odoo, you never know what Odoo will do with those states. And so you have very high chance that if you add a new state, you will break Odoo somewhere. So yeah, never change the state fields of Odoo. So you need something else. And the approach we have chosen to tackle that problem is to use UML state charts. So UML is a well-known modeling language and standardized. And UML is used to model state machines. So what you have in the state machines, you have states, of course, so those are the yellow boxes, they have names. You have events. Events trigger transitions on the state machine. So here you see in the draft state, you have the submit event that is allowed. In the manager's check state, you have the action invoice open state that is allowed. But that action invoice open state is also allowed here and here. There's the same event that is allowed in different things. And so event trigger transition. So an event in a specific state can trigger transition. So if the submit event coming, you go from draft to, if you are in draft state, you go to manager check. If the submit event is coming in another state, it's forbidden. So you get an error. And then there is a concept of guards. Guards are conditioned to to express when an event can, or a transition can be triggered. So here there is no guard, so anyone can click submit in the draft state, whatever their role, whatever the condition. But here you see that there is a guard on invoice open which says amount total must be greater than 5,000. And here the same event, but there is a guard which says amount totals must be less than 5,000. Which means that depending on that condition, it will be either that condition or that condition, that transition that reacts to the event. And then there are concepts of actions you can do on transition. So those are bits of code you can associate to either a transition or upon entering or exiting a state. So in this example, on entry of the approved state, we call the original invoice open action of Odoo, which what happens in standard Odoo when you validate on an invoice. Okay, but you could put actions on specific rows or when entering or leaving states. Okay, and there are also concepts of parallel states, so you can implement kind of lanes or substates. So you can do parallel approval things. And all those are standard concepts in the UML modeling language. So we did not invent anything here. All that is standard. And so we like that because it's really a visual paradigm. So when you discuss that with end users or key users in workshops, it's easy to understand. It's visual, it's clear. It's also very complete, so it forces you to think about all possible cases. What happens if we can submit there? Should it be an error or should it come back to? It's very easy to look after all the possible cases. But also very important, it's also a coding paradigm. So it's very systematic to translate such a diagram into actual executable code. And yeah, perhaps it's a bit small, but I published the slide after, but the chunk of code, which is declarative YAML file for developers, it's exactly the same as this. Okay, so you see the states, you see the events, you see the transition, you see the guards, you see the on-entry action. It's exactly the same. So it takes almost the same space to put it in code. So translation is absolutely systematic. So there is no thinking to do to convert that into that or the other way around. Actually, this drawing is generated from that code. Okay. So this very important part is that both it's easy to understand by functional people in workshop at the client, but when discussing with the developers, there is no ambiguity when translating that into code. It's very and then I'll show you a little bit of more code. The idea is to show you what you need to do to actually do something that works with that state chart. So in this case, you need to write a small extension of the invoice model with a mixin, with a nice talk about mixin yesterday. That's another one. You have state chart mixin. So you just say, okay, now my invoice implements the state chart mixin, and for my invoice, it's this state chart. So you give the file where you have described the state chart, and that's it. And that's basically all you have to do. So you can then call submit on invoice. You have not coded a submit method. It does not exist in standard Odoo, but by doing that, a submit method has been added automatically to the invoice. So you can call it. And when you call invoice open, which is the name of the action for validate in Odoo, it will go through the state chart first, automatically. And therefore check that the conditions are respected to actually validate the invoice. And then to make it nice to the user, you work a little bit on the view. And for that, we add a submit button. So that's a new button we add in the view, with a visibility condition which say, okay, this button is invisible if the submit event is not allowed. So just checking a flag. If submit allowed is false, then this button is invisible. That's a new button, and we can do that for existing buttons, of course. So there we replace the Odoo condition to make the validate button visible by this new condition, which is just ask the state chart, can we click validate no or not? Okay, and then yeah, technically you need to make those two fields visible in the view, but you did not have to code these fields manually. Okay, they are put in your object automatically by the previous mixing. And that's it. That's really all you have to do to implement this flow, this new flow on an invoice. And so how does it work? I made appear here a technical field with the internal state of the state machine to show you what's happening behind the scene. So that's a new invoice that's been created. And you see that's the Odoo state, it's the draft, standard stuff. And our state machine is also in draft state. You see it there, it's in draft state. And in draft state, only the submit button is allowed. So the submit button is visible. That's easy. We click on the submit button. And when we click on the submit button, the state machine goes to the manager's check state. You see it there. But for Odoo, we are still in draft. Odoo has not seen anything changing. And now you see the validate button. Why do you see the validate button? Validate is action open. And action open is allowed. Actually, it's allowed twice. You could do either this or that. It's allowed. And when we click validate, what will happen? We'll go there. Why? Because there is a guard that says to go there. We go there when the amount is greater than 5,000. And we are 6,000. So when we click validate, we go there. We are in the CFO check state. Okay. And the validate button is still there. Why? Because the action open is also allowed there. And our user is in the account manager group. If our user was not in the action manager group, the validate button would be simply hidden. And if someone who is not in the account manager group is trying to call the underlying validate method, he will get an error message, also because it's not in the right group, all coming from the declaration. Okay? And then when we click that, what happens? We go to the approve states, and Odoo has seen something moving. We are in the invoice is open. And why is it open? Is because only now, on entry of this state, we called the original invoice open method of Odoo, which is the standard Odoo method, which moves the invoice to the open state. So you see very little code, and immediately translated into an executable flow just by adding the visibility conditions on the button, or adding buttons for the new events we have added that did not exist in Odoo before. And so, since time is running short already, the benefits of this really mainly is that you have all the logic in one place. You don't need to look at automated actions, code overrides, and whatnot to understand what the process is. So it's easy to maintain. You have no if then else in your code. It's just you declare the state machine, not one if then else to implement. So much easier to read and understand. You can also put your actions in the same place, so it's easy to see what happens on a given transition. If you name your methods correctly, you will understand that a given transition is creating notifications, and easy to review. And also, even more important is that all actors of the project, the customer, the business analyst, the developer, all speak the same language. They can all understand the same thing. Whereas when you code all that, usually business analysts don't understand what the developer has done to implement this text. And here, all understanding is reviewed. Also, you don't touch the Odoo states, so you don't break the underlying Odoo flow. It's safe against XML RPC calls, something that developers often forget to do. They just hide the button in the view and are happy with it, but it's totally not safe. You can really break your flows when you do that. And also it enables some simple technique to protect from data import. Data import in Odoo is very powerful, so very dangerous opportunity to corrupt all your data. So we have no magical solution for that, but one thing we do, for instance, is actually make all the objects read-only after they've left the graph state. So user cannot import, but when reacting to the action on the state chart, we suspend security, so we do kind of sudo to suspend security and do the action even though the object is read-only. We have checked the condition when entering through the state machine, and though we are safe to say, okay, now we are sure the conditions are okay, we can implement our thing behind without worries. And so it's open source. So the project is a Scooby-Doo, because if you have not seen your code, you can untie them a little bit with that. It will soon be in OCA. For now, it's in a public Axon repository. It works with 9, 10, 11. It's not much documentation yet. Actually, it's the first documentation. This is the first documentation. And the underlying state chart implementation, as you see, we did not invent anything here. It's doing by a Python library which is called Seismic, which is done at the University of Mons in Belgium, with a complete implementation of the UML state chart. So things like parallel states, substates, you can do. So you can do a flow which starts two parallel approval process and say if one is, or the guards that say we must have those two accepted before exiting that one. It's absolutely trivial to do. Thank you very much. I guess it should. The implementation is a bit tricky because it's very tied to the underlying ORM, but we'll soon try it. I'll definitely try it on V12 soon. So my guess, it was a bit difficult to go from 9 to 10 because there was a big change inside Odoo. But from 10 to 11, the port was easy, so I expect it will be easy to go to 12. Other questions? Yeah.
Did you consider integrating BPM modeling into?
Yes. Well, we considered not long, not for long, because we prefer that approach. I personally find it simpler to reason about state chart than BPM diagrams. Perhaps it's a personal taste, I don't know. The other thing is that it integrates more easily in Odoo. You can stick a state chart on any other object or create new objects if you have a kind of transversal process that goes across different objects. Just create a new model to support the state chart, which is better integrated. And you can also, if you have in 11 or 12, you can trigger activities or notifications and use the standard activity notification mechanism of Odoo just by writing one line in the actions there. So it's well integrated in Odoo than an external BPM.
In your experience, the end user is at ease with the UML presentation?
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely. Yeah. Sometimes we need to simplify a little bit during the analysis workshop. You don't write all the details, or when you have action, you put a call out saying, okay, this is going to happen. So but yeah, except some simplification. Maybe you simplify the guards a little bit. So you need to find it, because the guards can become a bit complex, so you need to find a way to express the guard in the analysis in another way. But immediately, yes, end users are at ease. They understand that.
And of course, your developers do understand that.
And then developers do understand that. If you find a way to express the guard that the developer understands too, that it flows naturally.
Thank you.
What was the initial functional requirements? What was the format of requirements that you get? So I understand you have some use case description or something.
Yeah, it's actually Christelle there who did that, so if you want to talk with her. The initial requirement was a public call for tender with very high-level functional requirements, and then there were analysis workshops to reach that level of detail. That was done in workshops. Yeah?
You have use states. How do you show the user which condition has to be met to change state?
In that case, I think Christelle used a kind of color coding to express the guard, and then associated text explaining the conditions corresponding to each color.
So you show somewhere in the form, you show the user which conditions has to be met to change state.
In the form itself?
In the form, yes.
No.
You should know how it works inside. So
Yeah.
you have to press like 3 times validate, so the form gets from draft to open.
Yes. Yeah, they are supposed to know their process indeed.
You can add
Which is
tips.
not always the case, admittedly, but
You can add tips in the further.
we could show the guard with the tips, or indeed annotate the transition with the alt text to show a tip. That would be quite easy to do indeed. Okay. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
You